Hi, welcome back to another episode of Tuba People TV, where we talk about all things Arnold Jacobs, and today, other people as well. Puddles and I are here in Houston, Texas, with two dear old friends from Chicago and housemates. We were the three of us, three out of the initial 8 people in the original Brass House in Evanston, Illinois, when we were all at school at Northwestern University. We have Bob Walp and Mark Hughes, both of the Houston Symphony. Mark's playing principal trumpet, and Robert, you said you're starting your 31st season as assistant principal trumpet with the Houston Symphony.
Yeah. It's a blink. It's 30 years is truly a blink.
That's amazing.
Doing something like this.
Well, congratulations. Well, certainly that was a great example for me. I was fairly new in Chicago, just a year or two, I guess a couple of years, 2 years when you won that job. And anytime anybody won a job, go team.
Yeah, and
that was really exciting.
You had a party at the house, which was still going on when I returned to Chicago, and you somehow made those guys on Howard Street make me pay the tab. That was very slick.
We'll talk about that later. The two of you, I'm so excited to be here because as I was driving down with Puddles, we were discussing this. The two of you, really, you had studies with, obviously with Mr. Cichowicz at Northwestern. You had studies with Mr. Herseth through Civic, and also, to some extent, Mr. Jacobs. I think, Bob, you had a bit more time with Mr. Jacobs than you did, but still there's some common lineage there.
No question.
And I'd really love to have a bit of an open forum discussion about what were those 3 people like for you guys.
You should talk about the Mahler Fifth.
Well, the first thing when I arrived in Chicago, the fall of '79, first concert that I went to was a university night concert of Mahler 5. And at that time, I was as green and as unknowing as anybody. I had played with a major orchestra before, but literally had never played Mahler, knew nothing about Mahler. And we got there, it was a university night, so it was full of university students, and the orchestra was excited to play, you could tell. And they started with Mahler 5, and of course Bud sounded awesome, as he did the whole 5 years that I was in Chicago. Clevenger sounded great, but the thing that I remember that really shocked me out of my chair was in the opening section when Jake came in with the bong, ba bong, bong. The sound that he played, my jaw dropped, and I literally could not believe I'd never heard anything like it. And that is what, clearly set the example throughout that brass section. You had Bud on the top and him on the bottom, and everybody knew where they were supposed to be.
Yeah, I recall that concert because Bill Esther and I snuck in at Nakamichi and recorded it surreptitiously. And then we got chased out of the hall, but we didn't do any prison time, and surprisingly. But exactly that thing of the first, I went on university night, also on Wednesday night, and I was standing up in back of the gallery because we snuck in, and I remember Jake's playing is like it was patting me on the top of the head, because the way that orchestra shell is, it's seamless from just in back of the brass players to all the way up to my head, and I loved that in his sound and his presence as a musician, not just the physical presence in orchestra, but also wherever you sat, there's that immediacy to it. And having been around a bunch of great tuba players, he still sets that standard for who's going to be the guy lifting and propelling the brass section. And when it comes from the bottom, it's an exquisite experience for anybody playing up high, whether you're playing a third trumpet or first trumpet. It's especially lovely.
The overtones. It was so rich through the. It was like everybody could grab a hold of wherever they were in his sound and be with him. Those chorales in that piece, you hear a lot of orchestras play them, and it's a great, exciting piece, no matter what. But to hear that orchestra at that time play, it was life-changing.
And that was with a bottle of that, and they recorded that, so it's still available, believe it or not.
And actually, I remember that the LPs came out, and the LPs kind of had a dull sound to them, because that's what DG did back then. But the CD reissues are really good, and those are available. I think I emailed you about the Bruckner 6th
Yes,
And
yeah, that was one of your first. Yeah.
On a Friday morning, I was taking a lesson with Herseth with Bud, and he said, did you go to? I thought I saw you. Did you go to the concert last night? I said yes. The Bruckner Six with Raphael Kubelik, and he hadn't really been there much since they'd fired him as music director in Chicago.
Right.
And the orchestra they just loved him. You could tell they loved him. And Bud said, well, how'd you like it? And I said, I loved it. In fact, I hadn't really loved Bruckner until that very concert. It was the sound of the brass section was so beautiful. It was so rich. You could hear every inner voice, but it wasn't thinned out. So, some conductors thin you out in order to get clarity. This was rich and really committed playing from every member of the brass section. And Bud said, well, we're going to stick around this afternoon and hear it, because he knew I had a civic rehearsal afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, yeah, of course. He says, well, why don't you talk to the captain? Remember that?
Captain Yates.
Yeah, the Captain Yates, who ran security for the hall. He says, I think I'll talk to him, and we'll get you so you can stand in back of the stage left stage door where the little strip is. And I watched the whole concert from behind there.
Oh, cool.
And for that, the setup for the Bruckner Sixth was the horn section in their normal place, and in back, Bud just to the right and in back of Clevenger, and then second and third trumpets to the right, and Jay Friedman on first trombone, and then Christopher and Kleinhammer to the left.
Mm-hmm.
But in Jacobs, instead of being to the far left, he was in the middle, in back, directly in this forming this diamond in back of Clevenger, and equidistance between Friedman and Herseth.
A diamond of the principals, right?
Clevenger, and then here's Jay Friedman on first trombone, and Bud Herseth on first trumpet, and then Jake back here.
Wow.
And I watched, and this is 30 years later, I'm getting goose flesh thinking about it. I watched, I'd heard it the night before, but to be right next to it and in it, the way Jacobs propelled things, Jacob was sitting almost on the edge of his chair when he played.
Yeah.
And I was watching Kubelik's conducting with his eyes closed most of the time.
Right.
And here's I'm watching Bud had his eyes closed. I could just see a lot of the time. And that was my impression, but certainly Kubelik did. And it was this very spiritual experience.
Yeah.
Watching this and hearing this, and now understanding when Jacobs said, if you want to sound good out in the audience, you have to do 10 times as much here right now. And if you want to sound good right here, then you have to do 10 times that inside your head.
Mm-hmm.
I really got it. What is going on inside these guys' heads when they're playing is so robust and so beautiful. The musical image, the sound picture in their heads. And when following the concert, I saw Bud again, and he said, "That's pretty neat, wasn't it?" I said, I'm enthralled at what the effect Jacobs has on you. And he said, yeah, it's like he has his hand in the small of our back, and he's just lifting us up and making things easier.
Wow.
But clearly Herseth was really happy. He also said, yeah, days like this is why we do it.
Right.
It was a real great moment.
That's a great story. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Right. Bob, of course, studied with Jake a good bit more than I did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, what was that like?
Well, I was, I came from Southern California, where I had studied with a fairly famous and very mechanical teacher, and also studied with a marvelous musician and player, of course, Tom Stevens. But the other stuff wasn't working for me, and I actually dropped out of school and applied to Northwestern, got turned down, and then did it again the next year and got turned down the second time. And then I just drove to Chicago and knocked on Cichowicz's door initially, and he was surprised to see me. But then Jacobs was obviously, it was just clear to me. Gene Bicorni had rented the apartment below me when I was at USC, and he was bound and determined. He said, one day I'm going to go study with that guy. Who knew it would end up this way? But so I naturally called up Jacobs and went down for my first lesson in the fall of 1978. And I took lessons. I probably took close to 70 or 80 lessons with him. About a half of them I have on tape, and I'm not going to tell you guys where the location of those tapes.
we used to talk about them a lot, and that's what what led me to get a lesson with him, but I almost felt like I was getting them secondhand.
Yeah.
Between you and Shookit and you, we were
Yeah.
talking always about them, and it was
Yeah.
amazing the little
Oh, the
way he
little things he
phrases
would say.
things, these little sayings. You know,
Oh,
weakness is your friend,
friend.
strength is your enemy.
And with
I mean,
strangeness, what is it? Strangeness is your friend, sameness is your enemy. If you're trying to change, of course it should be weird, it should be new.
Yeah.
And if it's the same thing, guess what? You're stuck in your own box.
Right.
Get out of that thing.
Strangeness
Is your-
allows you to improve, allows you to do
Right.
new things. Yeah.
And also something there, the context of that is exactly the same as with Cichowicz and with Herseth, that you had all this space, all this working space. It was okay to screw up. Man, was it ever okay to haul off and commit and try to do something and miss it and miss the barn? And Herseth would laugh. I mean, with me, he laughed. It's a laugh. He says, "Well, I admire your, shall we say, abandon." You know, but Jacobs had all these ways of getting you to focus yourself. In your interview, superb interview with Rex Martin, Rex said he was just this master psychologist. There was never a lesson where I didn't come away from it playing so much better, and I'm still stunned. I listened to some of those tapes last summer. I was really amazed at
What shocked me, and you know, just the little time I spent with him, was how well he heard everything. His ears were like supernatural ears.
Right.
He could hear, and of course we all believe in that fundamental sound concept in Chicago, and how the sound is a window into your soul as a player, and you can hear, you know, function and all those things, and we all teach and we do those things. But Jake was so much better at it. He could hear things in one or two notes, and I remember playing pictures, opening the pictures for him, and he goes, "Yes, nice job. You force a little."
I know you.
I was really proud
I
of
know
it.
you're really happy with what you've done.
Exactly.
I can't get away with anything.
And he wouldn't let you get away
Right.
with anything.
Exactly.
He could hear it all, and that's the thing. A lot of teachers are good, but Jake had masterful ears.
That thing where you'd go in, and I would routinely start off a lesson with, especially Cichowicz or Jacobs, by, they'd say, "How are you doing? How's the playing?" And I go, "Oh, it's terrible." I give them this long litany of all the reasons why I'm a rotten trumpet player and I can't get anything done. And Cichowicz would always say, "Well, now Bob, let's see what we can salvage." And Jacobs would say, he says, "Really? Prove it to me." And so you get out the trumpet and play. He says, "That's not terrible. That's just bad. That's not terrible. You said it was terrible." I go, and you get back on your heels. You go, "What is this guy doing to me?" And once again, I'm paying him money. Then the next step is, he says, "No, play it again, but worse." What? What's with that? So then I play it. He says, "That's not worse. Give me your trumpet." And he'd get out. He'd buzz on his cutaway trumpet rim, and then he'd take my trumpet, put it, and he'd play. And he'd play so badly. Opening of pictures was a standard one to play badly.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, "Do that again." No. You need to stand up and pretend that's Carnegie Hall. When you step on there, and you're going to play the worst pictures anyone's ever heard there. People need to write about this in the New York Times. So I'd stand there and I'd play really badly. Now, and he'd just be. It was just unbelievable how badly he could sound, and he could make sound. He says, "Okay, now you do it," and I would do it, and I'd be laughing, and I'd play terribly, and he would say, "Now you heard Bud play that 3 weeks ago, right? You were there." I said, "Yes." He says, "Remember that? Step out of your Carnegie Hall thing." Then I'd have to step back on. Now be the reincarnation of Herseth playing that, and it worked, and I would play so easily and so well. And then I'd sit down and he'd say, you know what I'm doing to you, don't I?" He said, "Well, it's weird and funny." He says, it takes imagination to play beautifully. And so when someone's stuck in this being a method sort of player, trying to do everything right and not using their imagination, you need to break them out. And humor is one way to do it, and another way is by getting them to imagine very specifically a terrible trumpet player.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first time when he had me do the same thing with pictures. He had me close my eyes. He said, "You know exactly the way Bud plays this. Now you close your eyes, and I want to hear Bud Herseth playing it.
Right.
And to have that was the first time I think anybody had ever really made me understand that there's this cognitive creation here first. And then we talk about this some at work now, then we'll hear a player, and it can be in any idiom, but where it's just absolute purity between concept in your head, that conceived sound, and it coming out the bell.
Right.
And there's nothing interfering. I mean, to me, Jay Friedman is the closest thing to it right now that I hear. It's amazing to me. He thinks it, and it's already out the bell.
Right.
There's no dross.
There's nothing in the way.
Just bam.
Right.
And that was the first time that concept I'd ever heard that. And it was like, that was probably the most striking, eye-opening thing for me.
But then and again to realize how focused the sound image, how the incredible concentration. I was pictured as a fusion reaction the size of the sun, all reduced to the size of the softball inside your head. And he used to, and Jacobs would always say, you know how Bud sounds, you've heard him up close now a whole lot. He says, do you know what must be going on inside his head? Because you're only hearing a small percentage of that. He says, you need to turn that thing on. But Jacobs was terrific for me, because I actually showed up, and he said, what are you going to play for me? I said, well, whatever you want. He says, well, what kind of music did you bring? And I hadn't brought any music. And this is a great confession here. He says, well, what did you think I could do for you? I said, he had all those machines there in the
Our fine arts building.
Fine arts building. And he said, I said, well, confession here. I said, well, I thought you were just going to hook me up to some machines and stuff. Oh, he blew his stack. It is nothing without music. You can't get there without music. He says, so I had a very short lesson. Next lesson, though, I was there with a lot of stuff to play.
You were ready.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it was terrific.
Mark, when we were living in the Brass House, certainly there must have been a lot of, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of Jake stuff coming in at you. Is that what got you interested to have that lesson?
I'll tell you, to start with, a mutual friend of all of ours, Charlie Shookett, and I were very, very close, and still, I wish we're closer. I hate it that we live so far apart. But every Sunday night, from the time we started as freshmen at Northwestern, we had a standing date. And Charlie and I went every Sunday night either to Dave's Italian Kitchen, and that was really the default, or some other, maybe Carmen's or something. But we'd go to Dave's, and it's like they knew we're coming. We had our own little booth. We'd sit there, and we would talk for literally hours while eating about our lessons that week.
Yeah.
And I would talk about Cichowicz and what all he was working with me on, and all the different approach and all that. And Charlie would tell me about Jake and all that. And after we finished all that, then he'd call Jacobs, because Sunday night would be time to call to get your next lesson.
That's right.
But I would hear, so in a lot of ways, I was getting the Jake-isms immediately, and that kind of thing. And Charlie was who kept saying, you should go get a lesson with him. You'll love it. He's great. Blah blah blah. And that's sort of how that started. And then later, I mean, I knew Bob equally well the same time. And I don't remember when you were really studying with him.
I started
early,
even the year before. I arrived to Chicago a year before you, and that's when I started.
And a lot of those concepts, it pervaded everything that you did as well. So I was really bombarded on both sides, and I was just kind of chicken and scared to do it. I had Cichowicz and all that, and it just took me a while before going, and that's how it came about.
But I know, Vince, he was actually a student of Jake's.
Yeah.
And I know that when they were in the orchestra together, Cichowicz and Jacobs, they spent a lot of time talking, probably the same like you guys do at work.
Very much.
Talking about teaching, pedagogy, that kind of stuff.
I always got the feeling too that Cichowicz taught us a little more like Jacobs taught you guys. He would teach he could teach any art form, literally. I think Jake was that well versed. But when I would talk to Charlie and to you about some of the specifics, that he would talk with you sometimes a little bit more about specific things that worked on the tuba,
right,
excluding embouchure and things like that he would not talk with us about.
Yeah.
And we were in a little bit more generic terms. to a degree. I mean, you got more than I got the generic, beginning kind of thing.
You're talking about with Jake.
Yes, with Jake.
Yeah, so you...
Cichowicz, though, was very much covered everything. He wanted to make sure we were solid.
Well, he covered, of course, Jacobs didn't cover all aspects of literature and,
Right.
Which etudes and which studies and solo pieces you should be working on. It was very much, in my case, go to him. Sometimes I was just going to him every 3 or 4 weeks. Sometimes I'd let maybe let 8 or 10 weeks go by. Probably never more than that. And then sometimes I thought I really need to see him more. And then he'd get a little bit more specific, but he was always dealing with, in terms of literature, dealing with me in terms of what Cichowicz had assigned, or what later on what Herseth had assigned.
So, we were talking off camera earlier about how Vince, when you said you were going to go take a lesson with Jake, he made mention of,
Yeah, the one thing he said to me, he said, Mark, I always think of Jacobs more specializing with people that maybe have some function issues, and I don't consider you really needing to see Jake. He goes, I don't mind you studying with him, and if you want to, that's fine. He goes, but I don't think there's a need for you to do that, and maybe we should save Jake for people who need that special approach kind of thing. And so, I didn't get the sense that he was being in any way protective. I mean, Cichowicz was never that way. I just really thought he was just saying, that's fine if you want to, but you're pretty much you're okay there, and let's work on you learning to transpose, you stupid guy.
Well, the other thing is that Cichowicz told me after quite a while, after a year and a half or so, I mentioned that I was going to see Jacobs, and he kind of looked at me with those slits and great Chickowitz's wonderful warm smile. He said, I think you should keep up with that. That's pretty good. And later on, when I was just almost a month or so before getting my job in Houston, I mentioned this to him. He says, no, I think you've done well with this. A lot of trumpet players don't do too well. They get out. They'll get into these very extreme ways of doing things, and yet, the one thing Cichowicz talked to me, Jake talked to me a lot about moving my gut, actively moving, because where there's motion, there cannot be stiffness, and he talked to me a lot about that. And I don't know any other trumpet players he talked to about that. There must be, but I've talked to a number.
But maybe it was just for you. He was just really locked up.
I was really locked up. In fact, the first time I played for him, he said, "Oh, which coast are you from?" I said, "How do you know that?" But I'm from California. He says, "Oh, you're a hard-bellied trumpet player." He says, "Nah, you're going to get into progressive resistance issues, smaller equipment, then you'll be miserable. No, you have to change."
I remember there was another thing too that we did. We played so much together, duetting and quintetting and excerpts, and I mean we played together all the time. Ironic, isn't it?
I know.
But anyway, we worked so much together, and you were playing and you were having a hard time with upper register.
Yep.
And I was looking right beside you while you were playing, and you would, right before you take a breath, you would stick your tongue in between
my lips
and sort of touch your lip, and would be so far open. It was like when you went, you had to real quickly move your embouchure at the same time you're releasing it, and you wouldn't be able to get it closed. Right. And I mentioned that, and you said, I'm going to go talk to Jake about this.
And I went. This was in the basement of Kappa Delta, and I went down to see Jake within a couple of days, and I told him, and he said, "Really?" And he watched, and he got right outside, and he saw right when I went to play with something I was scared of, and trepidation about. I stick my tongue just for a second, and I go play. He says, "Boy, you've got one great friend there." He says, "Vince didn't notice?" He says, "Vince didn't notice?" "No, I haven't noticed." "Wow." So then he says, I need to watch you some more. Just go play a bunch of stuff." He says, don't be self-conscious. Keep doing whatever you're doing." And what happened was, he said, actually, it's not the aperture. It's that you're stopping your breathing at the same time. And
The coordination is what's thrown off.
Exactly. You're stopping your breathing.
Sure.
And that's it. He says, that's it. So nevertheless, you need to learn to not do this.
I mean, there are schools of people who, like Callett, who teaches sticking the tongue to make sure you're not closing down. I mean, whatever concepts those are. But people can make that work.
Right.
So, and that's actually right. It was that the coordination of your air was being impeded. Yeah.
Simultaneously, it's typical Jacobs. He took one fact, found something else that was much more important underlying, and then went after that.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, did I play a lot of things starting with no tongue. Tongue was banished to the bottom of its lair, I think is what he said.
Yeah, I remember him. I mean, for tuba players, much more pronounced than I think for trumpets. An elevated tongue position can be really. He would always say the tongue is the devil.
Yeah.
You know, certainly in the tuba case, it can be more.
You know, with us too, though, truthfully, when we get it up, as it gets higher up from the teeth up into the hard palate and stuff, we end up having the tongue harder that way, and it interrupts the air more. It's more explosive, and it doesn't sound as good. And when you listen to Bud play, I mean, and this is so amazing to me that I put this together many years late. I'm kind of slow at this, but in hearing Bud play, you know, I always had that immaculate articulation on the front of everything. It's very French in the way he tongues. But people always say that Germanic, you know, yeah, his sound is very American. I mean, Herseth's sound was always that Germanic heaviness, but the tonguing was French, and then it became the American school.
Yeah, so that's great. Mark, I remember one summer at the Brass House. I was away, and I think Bob, you said you were away also.
I was gone too, yeah.
But I remember hearing all about it, that Jake came up to dinner at the Brass House, and you were there, and Charlie was there, shook it. And
we had a blast. It was terrific. We had designed the whole evening, this afternoon really, of a barbecue, and invited Jake up. And it took a while for Jake to get there. He was about an hour or so late, and then when he got there, of course, he was as jovial as ever with his wife. And we got to meet her and talk, and you know, as the day went on, we talked about all kinds of things, some musical, some non-musical, and they were just really delightful. And then there was somehow, I think someone said, "How did you meet your wife?" to Jake, and it was one of those moments. He's got this little sparkle in his eye, which was so neat after all those years. You know, anytime you see someone who's late in their life and they've spent a lot of time together, and that real sparkle is there. And he had the little sparkle in his eyes, and he said, "Well, you know, remember, I also played string bass." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, when I was a student at Curtis, you know, trying to make money to sort of work my way through school and have some money to spend as well, he would take night jobs playing bass in a pit group where it turns out his wife was a dancer." And he remembers how he was playing when he looks up on stage and he sees her and he's like, "I think I'll make her my wife." And I did. And she just giggled real, you know. And
did you say, "Oh, Arnold"?
"Oh, Arnold," you know, it's just really, really very, very sweet. So it made our day. We all had just a terrific time sitting around and letting him tell us story after story of orchestra tours and different things in life and all that about him. So it's great.
Yeah, there's a Jake story that I haven't watched all of your interviews, but there's I haven't seen yet. It's just that when he was at Curtis, and he wasn't a tuba major, he was a double major in string bass and the bass baritone voice, that we used to play tuba in the orchestra, and the conductor and head of the school was this lovely, light-hearted man named Dr. Fritz Reiner, and so he had to really handle his tuba parts well, and they gave him a room to practice the tuba. He couldn't really fit in any of the small rooms, and they gave him it's off a hallway which connected the Academy of Music with Curtis Institute, and who walks down that hallway all day long? Dr. Reiner, all the principal players of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he says, "You know, I'm a pretty loose guy, but talk about intimidation." And then he said, "I realized I can't play anything but great notes. So I'm going to find some transposition and some tempo where I play beautifully and wonderfully at all times, even from the first moment starting out."
Right.
And I think that is maybe the underlying single pillar of what you call the Chicago style, because it's not about wind, it's not about sound, it's about just sheer bloody excellence. And you heard it every time the guy played. And that goes to a Herseth story that maybe it happened with you. In one of the Charliers, there are a couple of double sharps or something that carry through a bar after you play 94th notes. Then you get to this thing and you get it wrong. And so I played this for Bud, and I got there, and he stops, says, "Okay, good job on everything, but you did play the wrong note, like the wrong. He knows which one you're going to do." And I said, oh, I did. He says, why don't you do it again? So I start up at the same tempo. He says, stop! And I hear that German, Norwegian halt. He stopped. He says, no, you're only going to do it again wrong. You have to go so slowly that even you will get it right. He says, now I'm not telling you you're a dummy. I'm talking about, that's how I talk to myself. I find when I've practiced in a wrong note, I have to go, it's 20 times before I can get it right. He says, that first time that thing gets in there. He says, that's why I practice, this is my big secret, I practice slower than anyone I've ever met.
Mm-hmm. That's Bud talking.
That's Bud. That's, if not the best of all time, well, certainly within the handful of the greats. So
I wonder if obviously Jake, through his research, his reading, I think it's been documented that he read about 800 books on psychology.
Jeez.
And I don't think that Bud probably did that, but I wonder, they were coming at it from the very same point of view in terms of the repetition is what sets the habit, and so you can't undo the poor habit. You have to develop a new habit.
Remember that? Yeah, you
old
don't
habits
break
never go
the
away.
way.
Yeah.
You have to agree to
Old bad habits never go away. They're gonna be with you forever.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to remain
And they
vigilant
do.
and smart.
They do. I mean, we still,
Deal
you think
with
after
everything.
30 years we'd get it all
Yeah,
figured out.
right. Nope.
And we don't. It's still the same thing. You just keep hoping to put good ones in there, and that the more good ones you put in there, the body learns to actually,
Yeah.
that's the default as
Mhm.
opposed to the error.
Right.
Right.
I wonder what what Jake and Bud, it's well known that when the CSO Brass Quintet in the early days would go out and do school concerts out on the road, that Jake and Bud roomed together. I was wondering what they talked about.
That I would love to have those tapes, because I've wondered about that often, especially early on, and also with Herseth and Farkas. Philip Farkas were very close, very very close,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd go fishing together. I know, and I'm just curious about that, because there's this cross pollination between all of these men, and what a superb group of well-wired individuals. There was just such doggone good people.
I enjoy that. I mean, how lucky are we that
Oh.
we are in the orchestra together,
Yeah.
but all of we have 3 Northwestern horn players as well as 3 Northwestern trumpet players, plus a lot of Northwestern wind players and string players in the orchestra too. But Bill Vermeulen, our principal horn player, and I were in the same freshman theory class, but he got a gig almost immediately and left. His kids are my kids' age, so we socialize a lot.
Mhm.
And when Bill and I are together, we get, and it's fun actually. We'll talk about the intricacies of things that weren't maybe said to us that we've come across. And Bill and I both, and I do this same thing. The song and wind thing is there, but that efficiency quotient people didn't always talk about. Jake, in getting there, we would get there. And I think Cichowicz as well, but it wasn't always addressed, and there was always somebody that fell through the cracks and didn't quite put it together. And I think Bill's really got a great studio where he addresses that efficiency is so important. We got it with Cichowicz a lot with just things, the rudimentals that the Clark studies and all those things that made us to become efficient, and that allows us to when you are playing to be able to, as you get better and develop, to be able to have more stamina and other things of the physical side.
Yeah.
And then with Jake being the father of the mental aspect of it all, it seems to be a lot of fun.
It is intriguing to me too that at the very end of his career, Vince Cichowicz, it's no secret he was having problems in the orchestra, and was getting some heat from Herseth, and he went to and Jacobs told me this, that Cichowicz went to Jacobs, it is 35 years later, take some more lessons, spend some time with him, and Jacobs was a little unhappy that Vince wasn't willing to open himself up a little bit and sing more, really, truly, genuinely solfege that, or sing it in some way, absolutely, literally sing it, and that it was shortly thereafter that Vince left the orchestra. Now I don't know if that's the whole story, but I can't help but think that's part of it, because I had the sense, I mean, studying with Cichowicz, I mean, I have all my notes up there on the wall, someplace in the book, that I take notes on my lessons with Cichowicz, and I take notes on lessons with Jacobs. And they seem to be, they're very complementary, but from very different, very different sides of the street. Cichowicz, now, flow of the air and do this. He never had me sing anything or anything like that. And I believe that's because Cichowicz couldn't imagine anyone who didn't sing.
So
And
it was just assumed.
it's even stronger. I think it's a presumption that how can you be a human being without singing? And then there's Jacobs going on and on and on about singing. And one time I was writing back home on the L, and I wrote down. So Cichowicz says this, and Jacobs says this. Gee, I wonder what happened if I did them both. And it's just one of those times.
That's great.
Because Jake had me buzz pictures, when I was playing it. I remember that, and buzz it. And I had never done a whole lot of that kind of buzzing. I'd always done sort of the rudimental type sort of buzzing, scales and things like that.
And just a pattern, just
and I'd heard you guys talk about buzzing a melody, and I still every day always buzz somewhere over the rainbow and a couple octaves. I love do sort of standard things like that. But we were doing one of those group lessons with, Cichowicz would get 4 guys in for 2 hours, and we'd each play for each other. And the other 3 kind of taught the one that was playing. Cichowicz kind of stayed in the corner and didn't interrupt unless somebody said something really stupid. And we were sitting there doing, and by the time, you're upperclassmen, the stupid things weren't too common. So we were pretty much, you left us alone. And Euclid Moore, remember?
Yeah.
Was playing, and he was having
a
a hard time with the Haydn. And he was having a real difficult time with some stuff. And people were getting so frustrated they didn't know what to say. And I finally said, Euclid, can you buzz that? And he looked at me kind of crazy. I said, no, like literally, just pull your mouthpiece out and buzz that slowly and buzz that passage. And it was one of those things I was just waiting for Cichowicz to speak up. He didn't say anything, and he let me go with it, and he buzzed the whole passage, and then put it back in the horn, and it worked.
Yeah.
And Cichowicz stopped it. He said, I've gotten away from some things over the years.
Really?
And thank you for doing that. He goes, I have not done that in a while, and clearly that works. And I thought, I felt kind of cool, but I didn't. It wasn't me. I'd gotten that from Jake.
You're the man. You're the man with the answer.
But with that kind of thing. But it was really kind of a cool moment. Like I felt like I had done something right, but it was just what Jacobs had me do, and I just never thought about buzzing my excerpts.
The thing is that Herseth buzzed like a fiend. That was. Listening to him buzz was artistic. It was so good.
Well, the stories were too that like those guys early on buzzed together. Jake and Herseth would buzz things in octaves and literally buzzed in, like on a trip. A quintet would be going to play a recital or something, and they'd be in the back of the car talking and buzzing and all that. The other 3 were,
Herseth solfeged also, and for a long time I thought, like the last part of Heldenheim was. Now he's just jiving me. No, he's not. Because I began solfeging big time about 15 years ago, and solfege and then buzz while solfeging, and then buzz aid while solfeging, and then play. And the old Jacob thinks, you don't listen to yourself. You don't need to listen to yourself. You can't help but hear a trumpet anyway. But if you're focused on what's inside you, what you're singing, what you're telling, the story you're telling. I mean, how many times did Jake say? Be the orator, don't be the audience member. Be the teacher, don't be the student. Every single time you play, and he stressed that so much. And then of course, there's the presumption that you actually have to have something to say. So what would that be?
Right.
You've sat on committees. We've all sat on committees, and you can always tell the person. There's usually only 2 or 3 at every audition that come out onto the stage, and they literally take the stage. They are telling a story, and you listen, and you are willing to buy what they're selling because
they'll miss notes.
They're not perfect.
And they're not perfect,
but they have conviction, and you go, that's the one.
Yeah.
And there's no questions asked because they're telling stories, and that's the thing. And I always remember that Jake line. That's don't ask questions.
Make statements. Issue statements. Don't ask questions.
And sometimes it's good to say them with an exclamation point.
Yes,
Emphatic statements.
That business of hearing the LA Philharmonic growing up, even with a great conductor like William Steinberg would come. I remember Bruckner 7th there was terrific. And that orchestra had all the players in it. And especially a great first trumpet in Tom Stevens and a great tuba player in Roger Bobo.
Yeah.
These are fantastic players. And then I got to Chicago. And one time I heard Abbado do the Mahler 6th in L.A. in April, May of 78. And then in November of 78, Abbado's in Chicago doing the same piece, the Mahler 6th. And I get to hear the same piece played on the home turf by the same orchestra. So it's not like they're touring or anything like that.
Right.
And so the variables are just the differences in the orchestras. And where in Los Angeles, I walked out of there with my jaw dropped. I was amazed. I was filled with superlatives. In Chicago, I came out with the same sense, but something much more important. I had tears coming in my eyes. And that difference in the way that unanimity of way of playing in Chicago. And it wasn't just the note lengths, it wasn't just the in-tune major thirds, it wasn't just this and that. I mean, every individual sound in that brass choir was so robust and resonant, and right smack dab, and it wasn't louder than anybody else.
No, but it had more conviction. I mean, everything
more
about
stuff
it,
there
was more stuff.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was it. I mean, every time you hear it, and I think you had to be dead if it didn't move you.
Right.
I mean, you would get chill bumps so big that,
My dad visited Chicago, and Abbado of all people, again, same conductor, he was doing the Januszek Sinfonietta. And the offstage trumpets were Will Scarlett, and then Vince Cichowicz, and then Luther Didrikson. And so my dad goes, the guy says, you always talk about the Chicago Symphony, and the LA Philharmonic's fine, and he'd been subscribing to the LA Philharmonic since 1850, he's still going. And he comes out of that concert, he says, this isn't even remotely the same experience. This is of a different order entirely. And then, of all people, who comes out right then with Cichowicz. And my father walks up to Cichowicz and says, I have to tell you, that was the most marvelous playing. It was a really nice moment. But he really wanted to meet Herseth, and he really wanted to meet Jake. And he met them both, and had a cup of coffee with Jake, and I think had a piece of pie with Herseth. I think it was the standard way you got to know those guys. But the richness of that orchestra, I especially at that time period,
was special.
Really
I mean, it's still a great orchestra. It was special. Charlie Shookett's uncle used to talk about going and seeing, because he wanted to go see the old man that played first trumpet, because he just thrilled him.
Yeah.
Because I love going to see
That was the saying that Herseth put bums in seats. Yeah, yeah.
One of those things. It doesn't have to be a musician. Somebody that just came in and they got thrilled by listening.
I don't know why, but I just got to go be there and hear that guy.
Yeah.
Well, we were that way too.
Yep, no question.
Once you heard it was like, wow.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. It's been a really neat time to.
You need to come back again.
Come back again, yeah.
We do this all the time.
Yes, you do.
We talk about Jake and Cichowicz
we-
and Herseth every day.
We don't sit quite this close.
Puddles is not here.
That's right.
Oh,
Puddles isn't here. You're right.
But speaking of Puddles, he would like to give each of you this genuine University of Oregon duck beverage dispenser.
You're
So,
very kind. You're
nice.
very kind.
He
So if you put
appreciates-
the liquid in that, then it doesn't fall to the floor? Is that?
No, yeah, and this has faux foam.
Oh, that's what that is.
It's
Okay.
faux foam. Or faux froth.
It's a bit desperate, but we'll take it.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Michael, thank you so much.
Wow,
A
it's
great, great pleasure.
30 years since I've seen you.
Right.
Wonderful to see you.
Well, it's good to see you too.
We had some really great times. Millar, the old
Yep.
early Millar brass ensemble.
Yeah,
And
never
you-
believe it.
You were there originally, but then you turncoated on
But
us.
you remember the Millar Brass Ensemble, and we had Eric Rusk was in the
Yeah.
group.
Steve Hayworth, James Wilson.
James, who plays principal horn in the ballet orchestra here in Houston.
John Hutchison was still playing trombone
Hutchison.
with us.
I won't name all the horn players.
Joe Rakowski, don't name them all.
It was great. It was a great education. It was certainly it was a great part of my education to be in a house with you guys. It was.
It was an
terrific.
education.
And that kitchen in the brass house, and all those dishes, and that fridge, and occasionally a party with a cake or two.
You still haven't answered my email question. Why did we have 7 TVs? How did that happen? Who thought that was a good thing?
Well, I just remember, and I talk about with some frequency the Perry Mason TV.
Oh, that's right.
The Perry Mason TV was black and white, had the corded remote.
That's right.
That was
Corded
pretty
remote.
amazing.
Actually, no, it was color. It was color. It was green and white.
Oh, green and white. Okay. Well, it's really been great to see you guys. And,
Likewise.
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 we could go on and on and on. But,
Yeah, well, far too long, no question.
But we better cut it now. So, back to you. Maybe just say she was a dancer.
A dancer, not an exotic dancer.
We want to say exotic.
Maybe
Okay.
I came out of NU Brass Choir, so this is the year before you were there.
Yeah.
And Charlie Shucker comes up to me and he said, "So Bob, you took a lesson with Jake." It was exactly, I didn't know you had that. He said, "You've been seeing Jake more?" I said, "Actually, every 2 weeks for the last 6 weeks." He says, "I can hear it. It's great." And he walks away. And also we both remember distinctly, specifically saying, sitting in the basement of Kappa Delta in that sorority, and my room's down there, practicing playing duets and getting in trouble, and we're not doing so well. We're saying, I would just do anything. If only I could get there. If only I could do it. If only I could get a job. If only I could work. And then I remember looking at him and saying, "And I want to work with you. You know, there are a bunch of people I want to work with, and a whole lot I don't." And after all this time, there's something so beautiful there, because we're still in a way very opposite in a lot of ways.
You guys are so cute together.
So much.
You always have
He
been.
does this, and he's always been an encourager, you know, the teaching aspect of him. But this is something funny. You'll see it at work, and I'll do something, and that's good. You know, it'll be good. I'm actually proud of it. You know, it's like, yeah. But I don't even get to even acknowledge it to myself before he'll say, "If Vince could see you now." And I mean, and that touches me. I almost like want to bawl because I do it, but it is real. I mean, it's like because you want their approval so much, and they're gone. You know.
And the thought of Mark Hughes playing something descending in below near the bottom of the staff, below mezzo forte, and now he does it. His soft playing is better than anyone's I've ever heard, or as good as, and low and beautiful and coming back out. And that was one of those things that John Dewitt said, in a neon sign should be there. "This moment brought to you by Vincent Cichowicz."
He agonized for 4 years trying to teach me to do that, and so it finally happened. Mr. Cichowicz, you didn't tell me I was going to have to do this.
Playing a Philip Glass thing or something. No, this is just stupid. This shouldn't be done by anything other than a machine. And yet we can figure out how to get it done.
And we do lots of pops here too, and good and bad about that, but we do a lot of pops here, and that's sometimes brutal. You know, just brutal, and we're wiping the blood off and going on, and it's like, "Mr. Jacobs, you never told us we'd have to do this."
It's the way of the world. It's the way of the world.
Mr. Cichowicz never told you it would be that way.
Although John DeWitt tells a story about a couple times he plays actually with Chicago, and he's sitting there on Fourth, and Will Scarlett, who studied with all of his teachers, are sitting in the orchestra.
Yeah.
And Jacobs and Herseth and Cichowicz, and Will Scarlett's sitting there, and he says, "Oh, geez. You know, if only one of my teachers would have been honest with me and told me that it can be this bad. All those guys, if only one of them." And they're all going, "Oh, we're going to kill you."
Bob, it's so, I can't think of what I'm going to say next right now, but I'll think of it in a second. Here we go.
Well, we do want to talk about Jake, right?
We do want to take a lot, Jake.
Oh, that's what this is about.
You guys are just having me in stitches. Stitches. Puddles isn't going to know how to fly home.
Can you do the Mahler fifth on that?
Sure.
Okay, that's it.